Please, just one night. She whispered. Neither of them knew that night would change their hearts forever. There is a version of that night where Emma never knocks on apartment 4B. Where she stands in the dark hallway, hand raised, and turns back. Where she survives the anniversary alone, the way she'd promised herself she would. That version exists. She thought about it for 11 full minutes before she knocked anyway. She didn't know the man behind that door. She'd seen him twice in the elevator and never learned his name. All she knew was that the building's power had failed an hour ago, that her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and that tonight, of every night in the year, she could not survive being alone with the silence. When the door opened, a tall man in his late 30s stood there, candle in hand, confusion flickering across his face. "I'm sorry," Emma said, voice barely holding. "I know this is strange. I don't even know your name, but please, just one night. I can't be alone tonight." She braced for the door to close. It didn't. "I'm Daniel," he said quietly. "Come in. You're safe here." Neither of them knew yet what that sentence would cost, or what it would give them both. He made her tea she didn't drink. He gave her a blanket she wrapped around her shoulders like armor, and he sat across the room, close enough to hear her, far enough not to crowd her. "You don't have to tell me anything," Daniel said, but she told him anyway. "1 year ago tonight my husband died 3 blocks from our old apartment," Emma said, eyes on the candle flame. "Every year on this exact night, the walls start closing in. I can't breathe in that apartment. I just needed one night where I wasn't alone with it." Daniel didn't offer her the sentence people always offered, "I understand." He simply nodded once, slow, the way someone nods when they're carrying something similar and know that words would only get in the way. "My wife," he said finally. 2 years ago. Different night. Same silence after. For the first time in a year, Emma felt her shoulders drop half an inch. What she didn't know yet, what Daniel wasn't ready to say, was that tonight wasn't just any night for him either. They talked until the snow outside softened. Emma learned he'd been a hospice nurse for 12 years, a man who'd sat beside more final breaths than most people witness in a lifetime. Daniel learned Emma used to paint before the accident, and hadn't touched a brush since, that she still blamed herself for a fight they'd had the morning he died. "You know that's not why he died," Daniel said gently. "I know," Emma whispered. Knowing and believing aren't the same thing. He didn't argue. He let the sentence sit there, unresolved, the way grief actually works. But there was something Daniel hadn't told her. Tonight wasn't only the anniversary of his wife's death. It was also the night, 1 year ago, that he'd stopped letting anyone new into his apartment. Emma was the first person he'd let pass that door since. He didn't know yet if that was a mercy or a mistake. For the first time in a long time, someone wasn't trying to fix her. Someone was just staying. And that someone was quietly terrified of what staying might mean. Before we get to what happened next, because what happens between Emma and Daniel by morning is not what either of them expects. If a story like this has ever mattered to you, this is the moment to hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Every person who has ever sat with someone else's grief without trying to fix it will understand exactly why this story is worth staying for. Now, back to that quiet apartment, where the candle was burning low, and neither of them had said the thing they were both starting to feel. Around midnight, the power flickered back on. Neither of them reached for the switch. Daniel brought out an old record player, his wife's, he admitted, and let something slow hum into the room. Emma sat on the floor by the window, watching snow collect on the sill. "Why haven't you gotten rid of it?" she asked. "Same reason you haven't sold your paintbrushes," he said. "Some things aren't about moving on. They're about carrying it differently." She looked at him a long moment, and then, without meaning to, she reached over and rested her hand near his on the floor, not quite touching. Close enough that both of them noticed. Daniel pulled his hand back first. "I'm sorry," he said, standing too quickly, crossing to the window. I haven't done any of this, since her. I don't know how to let someone in without feeling like I'm betraying what I had." It was the most honest thing he'd said all night, and it landed heavier than either of them expected. Emma didn't chase him across the room. She just said quietly, "I'm not asking you to be ready. I don't think I'm ready either. I just don't want to be the reason you close the door again." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was two people deciding, without words, not to run from what had just cracked open between them. Emma woke on the couch just after sunrise. Daniel was already in the kitchen, 2 mugs of coffee poured, his back a little straighter than it had been the night before. A man who'd said something true and was still standing. I should go, Emma said. Face the apartment, face the day. You don't have to pretend you're ready, Daniel said, handing her the coffee. But last night, what I said, I meant it. And I don't want it to be the reason you don't come back. Emma paused at the door, coffee warm in her hands. Why did you let a stranger in last night, Daniel? Really? He thought about it honestly before answering. Because 2 years ago, nobody let me in. I promised myself if I ever got the chance to be that door for someone else, I'd take it, even if it scared me. It scared you? Emma repeated softly. Does it still? Daniel said. That's how I know it matters. She didn't have words for that. She just nodded and stepped out into the quiet, snow-covered morning, carrying something she hadn't walked in with. Emma didn't disappear. She came back 3 days later, not to be rescued, but to say thank you properly. She brought a small canvas, a single candle against a dark window. I finished it this morning, she said. It felt like it belonged here. Daniel hung it by the door, exactly where she'd stood the night she knocked. Their friendship deepened slowly over the following weeks. Coffee on Tuesdays, quiet walks when the city felt too loud. But it wasn't without friction. Twice, Daniel pulled back without explanation, disappearing into silence for a few days before returning, apologetic, honest about the fear underneath it. Twice, Emma almost let him, until she remembered what he'd told her that first morning, and knocked on his door instead of walking away. You don't get to close this door just because it's easier, she told him once, only half joking. I know, I invented that rule. Neither of them called it romance yet. It was something steadier. The kind of connection that doesn't announce itself, it earns itself, one honest conversation at a time. On the anniversary of the accident, exactly 1 year after that first knock, Emma didn't spend the night alone. She didn't need to knock this time, she had her own key. Daniel had set her candle painting where the real one used to stand in the window. When she walked in, he said simply, "You don't have to talk about him if you don't want to, but if you do, I'm here. All the way here, not just the part of me that's safe to give." I want to, Emma said. I think, for the first time, I actually want to talk about him without falling apart. She spoke about her husband, not with the shattered voice from a year ago, but with something softer, something that could finally hold grief and gratitude in the same breath. Daniel listened without trying to replace what she'd lost. He simply made room for it to exist beside what they were building. When she finished, he took her hand. This time, neither of them pulled away. 2 people who'd once been strangers behind a locked door were now sitting in the same warm light, no longer surviving their grief alone, but carrying it together, gently, without ever needing to erase what came before. Emma had asked for one night. What she found was a man who'd almost closed his door forever, and chose, twice, to open it again anyway. What Daniel found was proof that letting someone in didn't erase what he'd lost. It just meant he wasn't carrying it alone anymore either. Healing was never a single moment. It was a knock, a pulled back hand, a door held open twice. Even when it was terrifying the second time, it was 1,000 quiet choices to stay. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever needed someone to simply stay, without fixing, without rushing, without asking anything in return, that's exactly why stories like this matter. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and come back next time. Because the next story of 2 hearts finding their way home is already waiting.